If there were 20 metrics that you might throw into a model to decide what is the driver of deal flow, there would be the cost of debt, political actions, and then there's the other 18.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I'm your host, Nick Olsen. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Today, we have a great show for you. Our guest, he's back for an encore performance. He leads corporate strategy and drives growth initiatives as Private Equity Info's founder. He spends his summers in Sweden. He's an avid soccer player. And today, he's going to discuss macroeconomics and how it shapes private equity deal activity. Today's industry. Please welcome my guest today, Andy Jones. Andy, how you doing today?
I'm great, Nick. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, your last episode was so great. I'm like, we got to get you back on. So, plus you guys have a lot of great work you're doing, a lot of some new features and tools. With the new year, it's a new environment in M&A, so there's a lot to talk about related to that. But to start us off, give our listeners a little bit of an introductory of what Private Equity Info is, what purpose you serve, and anything that's new and great that you guys are working on.
Yeah, the quick summary is I started Private Equity Info in 2005. I was originally an engineer and then an investment banker. Founded Private Equity Info, like I said, in 2005, acquired by TrueSight in 2021. But we are an M&A research database. We track all things and people related to mergers and acquisitions, including private equity firms, their portfolio companies, their industries of interest and acquisition criteria, the people working at the PE firm, the executives at the portfolio company level, all the investment banks and bankers, senior lenders, public companies, private companies, hedge funds. You can imagine there's a list of data sets that we track that are all related.
And you guys are a great resource, for the lower middle market space, right? I mean, you're looking at deals of all sizes, but have a pretty robust database within, we'll call it the 1 to 10 to 15 million in EBITDA range, which is a lot of our listeners focus on. And just talking with our group at Cornerstone International Alliance and the other firms I come into contact with, definitely a go-to resource for research for firms.
Thank you. Yeah, I know the guys at Cornerstone have been using our product for a long time. Known Scott for a very long time as well. The database is a global database, and it is all the way from the bulge bracket deals down to the smaller of the small deals. Not so much business brokerage necessarily, but lower middle market definitely included. And so we capture the entire range and have insights and intel through that entire range. So it's been a fantastic database. And one of the things we pride ourselves on, and not to sound too much like a commercial, but is our data quality. It is just fantastic.
It is, absolutely. I can say that firsthand, having working within the platform. But what do you think, you're just looking back at, over the years, what do you think is the main use case that an M&A advisor would use Private Equity Info for?
Well, from the investment banking side, advisor side of our customers, there are currently 2 or 3 primary use cases and 2 normal entry points. So there's always the broad use case of you're just trying to learn about an industry. You want to see what deals are happening in that space. And certainly we track that, the deals and the people involved in that, both in terms of the private equity firms on the deal, the executives who led the deal, which investment banks were involved in the deal, which law firms were involved in the deal. So it's all keyword searchable or searchable through industry codes, et cetera. So there's point 1 is you can just kind of see industry trends, which is a new feature. I'll mention it here in a second that we just launched. But trends, we'll say trends and marketplace and what's happening, what's going on. And then the second 2 entry points from an investment banker's standpoint typically are 2 points in the deal. One is they're pitching a new client and they want to get smart fast. So that kind of is related to the first one, but this is a point in time where you're putting together your pitch and you want to get a sense of who are the buyers out there for this type of business, this size, this geography, this industry. So we're a great resource for that. It's great to go to your introductory pitch meeting with your potential client, trying to get that mandate, and say, we've identified 30 or 40 strong buyers for your company. So we're a good resource for that. And then the follow-on is once an advisor has the mandate and represents their client, they'll look to build out more formally that potential buyer list. And so that's where we really are strong. And the first part for your pitch is maybe preliminary research, but the second part is really where you're going to get into the details of why the fit makes sense and that sort of thing. And so we offer the ability to search the database yourself. We also offer custom research. Sometimes people get so busy, they just don't have time to do all of the research. And so we offer that as a service as well.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up that pre-pitch, analysis, because I think it's a great strategy. And we were recently talking to a couple of private equity firms who echoed that too, because you go into a pitch with your client really focused on landing them, but also you've taken that extra step of thinking about who are the potential buyers and, having them, whether it's logos or a list or talking about, them by name, it shows you took that extra effort really to dive into their company and who those strategic fits, whether it is a strategic or a financial buyer, private equity firm, that you've kind of taken that next step to really show that you're vested in this opportunity. I think it's a great point.
Nick, I'll highlight two points and then I'll stop sounding like a sales guy. We've built two tools in particular, one recently that I think is super useful to anyone in the space, but to investment bankers in particular. One is a tool called Auto Search. And essentially you can take a website, maybe it's a client you're pitching, or maybe it's a company that you're interested in their industry, and just drop in their URL. And with two clicks, and we'll say 1 or 2 minutes later, we will map the entire landscape of companies in that space related to the URL that you just provided. And it'll be mapped into, here are companies that are portfolio companies of private equity firms, so PE-backed companies. The second will be, here are privately held companies, which will be strategic players in that space. And then the third tab will show you the publicly traded companies in that space. And so imagine that you're going prepping for a pitch. You don't want to spend 6 or 8 hours doing research to try to find kind of what's going on in the space and then the names and companies of the players. In about 3 or 4 minutes, you can just get a map of the landscape of what's going on. And so that's a really good tool for pitches. And then the other is this new overlay, I'll say, we put on top of any search you perform called Trends. And it shows you the pulse and frequency of transactions in a particular industry for whatever search results you have. You can see it by geography. You can see the ratio of platforms versus add-ons. And it's just kind of gives you a really good pulse of what's happening for any specific search you do. Just nice graphical charts and overlays to give you a real good, clear sense that you can pop into your pitch and really inform your client as to what you see is happening in the marketplace from our data.
Awesome. That's amazing. Two great resources that make, I think, like you said, analyzing the great research that you guys do a little bit easier. Yeah, because you could go down a rabbit hole and spend hours on research. And if you got, like your tool that can do it in 1 to 2 minutes, like, wow, you saved us hours, which is anything AI related right now, because that's all the rage. And we gotta be more superhuman than ever.
Yes.
But today, like I said in the intro, today's discussion is really around just the macro environment and how it's shaping private equity deal activity, and what, as investment bankers and lower middle market M&A firms, what that means for our deals. So what are you seeing in today's market macroeconomically, and what does that look like for the private equities behavior in this space?
Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the industry's most underappreciated metrics is the holding period that the private equity firms have for their portfolio companies, specifically the median holding period across the universe of private equity firms. And so I did a little work in advance of the call here, and I thought I'd show you some graphs and charts and talk about that a little bit. So let me share my screen here. If you'll let me know when you can see that.
There we go. I got it.
I looked at 2015 through the partial year of 2026 for the median hold period. So that, the x-axis is the years, the y-axis is the median hold period for every exit done that year. So you can see here in 2021, there were 1,503 exits. And the median hold period, of course, you have to have an exit before you know the hold period. So if you know the exit date, you know the investment date, you subtract the two. If you look at the median across those 1,500, we have a 4.8 median hold period across all industries, all geographies, all deals. Let me just kind of walk you through the trend here and then draw some conclusions from that. If you look at 2015 through 2022, the median hold period, it really held, I will say, remarkably steady, especially considering in the last bit, there was a global pandemic. There was a historic financial stimulus, a lot of issuance of debt and printing of money. And there was maybe you might say, a once in a generation exit frenzy in 2021, which if I scroll down a little bit here, you'll see the exit volume peak in 2021 here, 1,500 exits. So that was all fueled by, cheap debt at peak valuations. But then if you look at the line here, something changed. And I know on this graph, maybe this doesn't look so significant because I have the scale up to 14 years. I probably should have made the scale to 10 to kind of show that the statistical significance here. But generally speaking, if you look at, as interest rates tightened and climbed, I should say, sharply, the exit markets tightened. That's what I meant to say. And the holding periods moved from what was a 4.8 range to a 5.5, 5.6, 5.9, and with some Q1 transactions here of 5.8. And you might say, well, in just 3 years, we added a full year of holding period. So to me, the holding period, what it does is it captures, like in a single metric, the collision between entry discipline or the lack thereof, buying at peak valuations or not, with 2, like macroeconomic conditions, with 3, the pressure to return capital to LPs. And so it may not be entirely clear from this one chart, but if you were to look at all the data I've put together that supports this chart, the picture is really clear. And that is, it's not that the deal pipeline is thin. I think people were saying that in 25, late half of 24, 25. It's that it's backed up. There's a bulge in the pipeline. And if you think about, well, let's look at 2025 data. If you think about 5.9 years, call it 6, that means on the median, these deals were bought in 2019, just before COVID, peak valuations. And so they're being held longer to get a proper ROI on their investment. So I'll say one more thing and then I'll pause and let you ask questions or interject a little bit. So my thesis is, if interest rates come down, we will not only see more PE acquisitions because the math pencils out better, but I would expect us to see a rush of exits as well from this bulge in the pipeline that comes from this increase of an entire year of portfolio companies stacking up, being held longer than normal. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good assessment. And I love the thought that you put into this analysis here too. Kind of what does that look like then? Do you see this trend happening, continuing, or what does the next 2 to 3 years, 12 to 8 months look like, as far as these hold periods and the buyer appetite, just the capital that needs to be deployed out there? Like I said, plus returning that to the LPs too. What does the next 12 to 18 months look like?
Well, I think the last point is critical. I mean, the LPs only have so much patience for
Right.
capital to return. And the bulge in the pipeline of private equity firms in mass holding their portfolio companies longer than normal has implications for the life cycle of the fund flows through the capital markets, right? So if it's not being returned to the LPs on the timetable that you might have expected originally, the LPs don't have that refreshed, renewed layer of cash to infuse back into the private equity markets, which is why fundraising has been more difficult lately.
And, when you look at that too, the time that is longer, do you see, even kind of take that to the the add-ons or the, that, we're looking at to those portfolio companies. How do you see those transactions affecting? Are there more of those transactions happening because they're holding on to these platforms longer?
It turns out, yes. If you were to look at historically, now I'm talking off the top of my head, so I don't have a graph and a chart. So if I get the numbers a little bit wrong, you'll forgive me, but the general gist is right. If you look back all the way through 2005 to 2019, something like that, generally speaking, there were about 3 platform investments for every add-on. And it seems a little backwards, but a lot of firms just didn't have an add-on strategy. They bought companies and they ran them. But what happened was, once we went through COVID and a lot of money printing happening, and we went through that 2021 spike of both investments and exits, what happened was a lot of uncertainty. As interest rates came back up, the cost of debt came back up, there was a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. And when there's uncertainty in the marketplace, and yet you need to still deploy capital, what you do is you make smaller bets. And so add-ons actually retained a fairly constant level, whereas platforms dropped significantly, particularly at the upper end of the market in terms of enterprise value. And so what we went to is like a 3-to-1 ratio went to a 1-to-1 ratio. There was one platform for every one add-on. And it's because platforms came down and add-ons, held fairly constant to slightly increased. So yeah, add-ons remained robust. Now, I think that's switching back a little bit now.
And is that because you're seeing now these longer holds kind of now look to exit here in the near future?
It might be. I think we're getting preliminary precursor evidence of deal flow picking up. Our TrueSight division, which helps investment bankers find buyers for their clients' companies and also does retained buy-side search services, they're seeing like a 12 to 14% increase in inbound deal flow in terms of teasers. So that's the early indicator of a pickup. We're seeing a pickup in the database itself. Like, one of the great things about having our database internally is we kind of have a view across a lot of different firms and a lot of different industries at any given time. And it really kind of gives you a pulse of what's happening in a bigger picture story. So we're seeing a pickup. The early indications are that in Q1, things are picking up.
And do you think that holds true for the remainder of the year?
It's a function of interest rates. If there were 20 metrics that you might throw into a model to decide what is the driver of deal flow, there would be the cost of debt, number one. There would be, say, political actions, like maybe someone decides to tax capital gains differently, that'll be a driver. And then there's the other 18. It is that significant. The cost of debt is the primary driver of macroeconomic deal flow, at least in the private equity world, both for investments and exits. I have the data to support it. The correlation is so undeniable. You might argue correlation doesn't determine causation, but if you look at the data thoroughly, it's there. And so the cost of debt is the primary driver. There was an interesting deal, and back in 2012, there was some proposals to change the capital gains tax to personal rates. And we see a spike in December of 2012 of a bunch of exits in our data because everyone's trying to lock in those gains just in case the law changed. Now, it turns out the law didn't change, but the threat of a taxation change due to policy really drove a massive spike in exits in the data in December of 2012 as everyone's rushing to the exits to lock in the capital gains. If you're going to exit anyway in the next 6 months, why pay 10, 15% more? Mm-hmm. So there are geopolitical events, but the cost of debt is the primary driver. So I say all that to say, if interest rates tick down, we will see an increased number of deals. That's my thesis. That could be wrong, but that's what the data is kind of telling me.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. Kind of shift and focus a little bit. What shifts have you seen in buyer appetite or capital deployment that may have surprised you over the last 12 to 18 months that may be of note to talk about?
Well, I don't know if it surprised me, but it really drove home this idea that it's uncertainty puts the brake and pause on deals. And the private equity firms are very quick to put their foot on the brake and very quick to put their foot on the accelerator. And so they tend to move very spiky as opposed into like maybe corporate development might be a little more smoothed out cycles, but with their finger on the pulse of what's happening, the private equity firms tend to stop and go real quickly. So deals will happen in unfavorable conditions if the conditions are known. And we had a lot of uncertainty in like the last 16 months, maybe something like that, the last 12 months. It's just like, it's hard to know what exactly is going to happen. Do you wait to see if the interest rates will come down before you do the next thing? There's some geopolitical events that are causing some turmoil and uncertainty. And so that really comes out of the data. You see a fall off in investments, exits, platforms, and even add-ons when there's uncertainty.
And yeah, we've had a lot of, and that's I would say just within our own alliance too, that's been pretty evident as you look at just deal flow and deals getting, pausing or, not happening, and, they're not going to market. Like I said, you said that bulge in the pipeline, I think that was definitely seen with just the uncertainty that we've experienced over the last, like I said, 12 to 16 months. Next question I have for you, Andy, is, talk about deals. Obviously momentum is a big thing. And, most deals can lose momentum. Where do you see that happening in most cases? Like, where are some common, factors that maybe, kind of slows, because as you say, time kills all deals, right? So when you slow momentum, you risk that. What have you seen as inflection points on momentum, and how can, in your opinion, advisors proactively eliminate those slow points or get ahead of them?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I've been thinking about this a bit lately, just sort of taking a big step back and thinking about, well, everyone who's done deals knows, like you said, that time is really the enemy of the deal. And it's not that time itself is bad, but time lends itself to the probability of something happening unexpected that causes a hiccup, right? You lose a major client, someone has a health issue, all sorts of things can happen with time. We have a global pandemic, like all sorts of things can happen. And the shorter you compress the time, you change your probability of something weird happening, right? And that's all that is.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the progression of a deal all the way from we've identified a potential client we're pitching to deal closed. If you think about it, if that's the time window in which we're operating, I'm trying to get my hands in the frame here. If that's the time frame that we're operating in, where do you have, as an advisor, where do you have the most control? And at least for me, this is left and this is right. I don't know if the screen is mirrored, but if this is the beginning of time for a deal, not of the world, but if this is the beginning of time, you have the pitch phase. And in the pitch phase, you can certainly do your work quicker using tools like ours and others to help compress that. But there's a decision point from the client's perspective as to, am I sure I'm going to sell my company? Are you the right advisor for my company? And they have to think through that. And there's not a lot of rushing you can do to get them to decide faster, other than doing a great pitch. So you have, we'll say, a low to moderate influence on compression pre-client mandate. On the other end, once you're into, like, let's say due diligence and on, or even before that, You have multiple potential buyers, we'll say. I mean, you can help speed things along by getting information requests quicker. But on that side, the buy side is really driving the timeline. On the front end, it's the client. On the back end, it's the buy side. And maybe they're slow, or maybe your client's a little slow in getting you information. We all know that happens.
Yeah, it does.
There's also low to moderate ability to compress that end of it because things just take time when you have multiple parties involved and you're waiting on other people. But there is a section there where you've got the mandate and you're about to go to market. That's really where you're doing the work as an advisor, and that's where you have a high probability or a high influence on compressing that time as much as you want. And that's where systems, processes, automations, AI tools, creating agents that can do some of the processes for you really come into play. And so if the goal is close more deals, which it is, and if the goal is reduce the time on a deal such that you have a higher probability of closing the deal because something wacko doesn't happen in the interim, well, then you have to look and say, well, where do I have the most ability to compress the time? And it's in the materials prep, it's in the buyer identification, it's in putting all that packaging together and showing to your client, this is the teaser, this is the information memorandum, this is the NDA, this is the buyer list and why, and all that. That's the meat of it where you can compress the deal. And that's where I would focus if I was an advisor.
And you mentioned AI, and that's like, that is where people are digging in right now, and how AI can help compress that timeline, especially, yeah, I said pre go to market, and in between the pitch phase, where you can do a lot of the work ahead of time. And you mentioned before, just even, when you're looking at using your platform to create a list of buyers at the pitch, like you're already kind of getting ahead of that at that point. Now you're going to dive in deeper. You're going to, consolidate that to a more precise list of buyers. But, you can spend a lot of time on a buyer's list. And I think that is one of the main areas in which AI can help us compress that amount of time to, to find the correct buyer's list, because then you create, efficiencies that way, and like you said, a process and an agent that can look at, especially if you're feeding, past deals into this AI tool. It understands what you're looking at, and then it can help you, on the next one and the next one, and the next one be smarter and smarter and smarter, and hopefully help you get that more dialed in. But I think that's one area in which AI can help us all.
It is. I think a lot of firms know of AI. A lot of firms use AI. A lot of firms are using AI like ChatGPT to ask questions, to get smart fast. They're using it to write more efficiently and more succinctly and more quickly, and to produce their teasers and information memorandums. But I don't know that everyone knows how to lock into more of an agentic AI build where you've created agents that are doing some of the repetitive tasks for you. That's probably the gap in AI right now in the M&A market space, is people are asking it questions and they're using it to write better or write faster, but they're probably not automating things with AI in a way that makes them work more efficiently. I think that's the case. Would you say that's accurate?
I would, yeah, yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Just because it is, I think, somewhat the fear of AI and understanding what its capabilities are. You hear all the time, AI is going to replace jobs. Well, I think, at least in our market, and this is my opinion, this is going off of conversations I've had with others, is I don't think many people in this industry are looking, some might, like I said, there's always exceptions, but from what I'm hearing, not replacing people, but just giving your people the ability to do 1.5 of, times the work, not, getting rid of them, because there's such a human element in what we do. And, to be able to, and you see it all, in a deal, especially with your client, and you want to stay ahead of them. You want to, have, calls like this or in-person conversations, just check-ins, and you can't automate that necessarily, but it's definitely something that people, I think, are dipping their toes into the water right now and seeing what it could be. And I think, there's more and more tools out there that are, taking AI like a chat GPT, but also the others, and creating a tool that is specific to investment banking, and what are the problems that AI can solve in our industry. Prompts, how can you do repetitive prompts for the same thing you're doing deal by deal, so you're not going back to square one every time you're looking to find have that part of the process and leverage AI. So I think there's a lot to learn. I think everybody's knowing of AI, like you said, and knowing that they need to embrace it, but at to what level, I think, is that next step.
Yeah, right. That's right. And going from, well, first of all, I'll echo what you said. People are going to be more efficient. You'll be able to do more deals more quickly with the same number of people. I don't know necessarily we'll see a headcount reduction unless maybe at the junior level. But the transition from prompting AI to agentic workflow processes creation is actually a fairly significant step. I mean, I think we've all used Google our whole lives. And so entering a text-based thing into a window is very native to us. But setting up agentic processes is not, where you have an API key and you're actually doing some coding, and it needs some people that are fairly tech savvy and probably a database and that sort of thing. I don't think that level of implementation has happened at scale, except maybe at the larger firms. But there's a real opportunity at the middle market and lower middle market firms to do that and have it pay for itself rather quickly.
I could not agree with you more. And that's something that we're diving into and seeing what options are out there and what areas of the process we can impact positively. Because you say you got a bulge in the pipeline, that's going to come to a head, and now we're going to get bogged down with the manual work. Well, if we can implement these processes in place, we can not really have a blip in the amount of time that we're doing on these deals, and maybe even reducing that time. And then now we can start the next deal maybe a little bit sooner, and then it'll, over time, at least in the near future, it'll allow you to maybe close one or two more deals this year. Who knows?
Yeah, the other thing that AI is quite good at, besides automating processes, is synthesizing vast amounts of information where we as humans have a harder time doing that at scale. We implemented an AI search across our database, which kind of makes sense, so that you can natural language search the database. And what you find is, if you just wanted to know the answer to a basic question, let me think of a basic question like list all the private equity firms in Texas. You're just better off using the drop-down window and old school on our database and selecting Texas from the location and just getting the list, right? That's a deterministic process. It'll be the same every time you drop that down, at least for the next couple of minutes. If our team hasn't added a firm, it'll be the same answer. Whereas AI is probabilistic, and it will maybe give you a slightly different answer each time, or different formatted. But what it's excellent at is thought leadership analyses and trend analysis on vast amounts of data. And so where we see great benefit there is, what is the question, like, what is the general trend? And write me a thought leadership piece on private equity firms investing in medical device companies over the last 5 years. Include size ranges, geography, whatever you want to say about that, and create that report. Now, historically, you'd have an analyst do those searches, compile all the data in Excel, and kind of try to spend a couple days on it and figure out some trends, which they would probably do. And AI will give you the answer in the next 15 to 20 seconds, And so that's actually a super useful thing that we've built on AI search in our platform.
Yeah. That's just a natural and, easy way to save time. And, even the other thing that AI, could potentially save time on is, in valuations. You look at the time that people are in. We have great models built out there, but there's still a lot of gathering and finding information and all that sort of stuff, and analyzing. And I think I'm hearing more and more people kind of embracing AI for just some of the valuation work. Now, like anything AI, right? You can't take it fully at face value. So there's still has to be, that time to look over.
You have to vet the answers. If you're using AI in the wild, I call it, you have to vet Right?
Right.
You can't just believe what it says. It will make stuff up and happily do so. We limited the output to our AI search to only be that which is in the database, which is human verified data. So that prevents the hallucinations on our end.
Yeah. Right. Because the data's quality is supreme. Right. Andy, this conversation has been amazing. So I always like to wrap up with a couple of takeaways. So what is one thing that you think from our conversation today, that one or two things that our listeners should know and that they can leverage to maybe, make an improvement process, whether it's AI or using your platform or understanding, I love the conversation on the hold period and what that means and what the future holds for deals and interest rates. Like, what is the one or two takeaways that you think our listeners need to know from our conversation here today?
Well, look, we can talk philosophically about macroeconomics and interest rates and the Fed and issuance of debt and all this stuff. But as a practitioner, you're either going to see deals or you're not. And so it sounds great and it's all very pie in the sky, but really are deals coming in or not? And that has really a lot to do with, like you said, it's a relationship business. For a transaction business, it's very relationship driven. And I would say if you're playing the long game in M&A, you are building relationships. That is the main thing. So the opportunity set in front of an investment banker advisor is something like your network squared, right? So if let's say 20 people, you have a network opportunity score of 400. If you know 100 people, you have a network opportunity score of 10,000. It's like that different of a scale. And so I would work on the network, but build the relationships because the foundation is trust and chemistry. It turns out one of the secret weapons of successful investment bankers is that they're trusted and likable. Like who would have thought that would be the criteria you need to get a deal? But it turns out that relationships build trust and likability.
Absolutely. And trust is important because you're dealing with the biggest financial transaction of a person or person's life. And that's pretty significant.
And it's not just financial, right? They're also concerned about, what are you going to do to my employees that have been working with me for 20 years? And there's a lot of other considerations that go into that trust factor besides just the financial outcome.
Right. And because you've done this many times, business owners have probably never done this before. So being proactive and leading them through the process. And, you always hear, investment bankers are, psychologists, as well. So managing the emotions of it too, like the people side of it, you can't do that with AI, right? Managing the emotions of the deal in the process, because they're going through it all as a bit like now their identity's getting taken away from them. What are they going to do afterwards? And it all has to be top of mind and relevant in the process to address that, not shy away from those conversations.
Yeah.
Andy, did you want to talk anything more? You talked about trends. It's a new tool for you guys. Did you want to talk any bit more about that before we sign off?
No, I think I'm good. I may be talked out. You've tapped my brain.
We've been going for 40 minutes and I always say 25 to 30. So I took 15 extra minutes of your time. So Andy, really appreciate you joining the show again. Love having you. I think our listeners will find tremendous value in just learning from you, your insights. You're definitely in the weeds on all this stuff and research and taking that to the next level. So where can our listeners find information about you, private equity info? Like where can they find all the great stuff you guys are working on?
Privateequityinfo.com is the website. TrueSight is the parent company, I'll say. TrueSightLLC.com. Reach out to myself or Dan Mahoney, who's the CEO of the company. But I'm happy to have conversations with anyone if you want to talk about research, if you want to talk about our database and how we might help, if you want just to shoot ideas about how can you use AI and leverage that in your own practice, give me a ring.
Awesome.
My phone number and email are on the site.
Again, Andy, thank you so much for joining. That is all we have for today's episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Make sure to share, like, and comment on this episode. Pass it on to anybody who you think might benefit from our conversation here today. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Click that notification button to make sure you know when that new episode is live. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And you can find all of our episodes at cornerstoneia.com/podcast. Until next time, everybody, take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.